나무 묘호랭개교 나무 묘호랭개교 나무 묘호랭개교 Hello, friends. I hope this podcast finds you healthy and secure. You would think I would check this before I start the recording, but here we go with the glasses again. I've been rereading and reading some new material coming from the finds in Gandhara, which actually is no more, but the region known as Gandhara in northeast India, which now is shared by Pakistan, Afghanistan, Kashmir, Peshawar, that whole region. And you know, a couple decades ago, many important ancient Gandhari script and Pali and Sanskrit and Prakrit of all things were found buried, as was the tradition then, to make sure that the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha would not be lost over time. Early Buddhism, and in fact, even the Lotus Sutra was meant to be a future teaching, which is now ours. This preoccupation with not losing the teaching of attaining this enlightenment, this attainment of Buddha-ness, was very much a preoccupation and a concern, especially in the early centuries of Buddhists. But it has maintained, this is one of the reasons there's such a strong tradition of scholarship in Buddhism. Mahayana itself is a strong dedication to complete understanding, not only to practice, but to make available to future generations. It speaks for the uniqueness of the teachings of Buddhism, Shakyamuni, and the scholarship of Buddhism for centuries, millennia, right? So, in reading this book I got from one of the researchers, something becomes glaringly true that he shares. You know, there's a whole world of scholarship that's very inaccessible to you and I, unless you're in the circles of this high academic, archaeological, anthropological, paleological, and research on antiquities and ancient teachings, and putting back together old swaths of paper that have long since, because they were folded, disintegrated in the middle, and then comparing the same documents from different schools and different areas geographically. We find a lot, if not all, of the sutras and commentaries and practices that we find evidence for in different languages, from, as I was saying, Pali or Prakrit, or more predominantly Gandhari, which was a script very popular in that region of the world for documenting these things. And you have to realize most of these documents were created as official scribes as part of a donation from a wealthy, whether a king, oftentimes a king, or a wealthy donor that wished to gain good cause, good karma, for doing the Buddha's work, doing the Bodhisattva work of capturing the teachings for posterity, although truly Bodhisattva would be to teach others, but by writing these things down and make sure these teachings were kept as clear as possible and as close as possible to the long oral tradition of the teachings and the actual learning of Buddha's teachings. This, it's in the Lotus Sutra. It's not only to embrace the teaching, read the teaching, recite the teaching, but also to copy the teaching and to instruct or propagate the teachings. Those are part of Shakyamuni's exegesis. At the time, that was an oral part of the practice. And so for hundreds of years after the Buddha's death, Buddhism was largely known through this memorization, still today, that we perform, right? When we do Gangyo, we are honoring that tradition, that oral tradition, right? But the interesting thing, before I dive into these skandhas, is that there's such this exegesis of writing things down. There's such a variety, and what I want you to understand is that when Shakyamuni taught orally, there was basically an ovation to the teaching that laid out the teaching. And at the close, there was a reminder and a recapture of the teaching. So this is why you see so many sutras have this long kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? This oration of the teaching, followed by, or sometimes intermittent in, verse portion. Because verses are easy to memorize, easier to memorize. And so largely that was the portion that recapped, repeated in verse form the entirety of the teaching. And oftentimes the verse forms had nuances and elements in it that weren't that clear in the initial ovation, if you will, of the teachings. But the middle portion, in many sutras, not all of them, but the middle portions often were just free form. And you can imagine, as Shakyamuni traveled and taught the same lesson plan, if you will, over years, 10, 12 years, basically the same area of teachings, you could easily understand where he would lay out a teaching to a new group of people with maybe some of the regulars that were always following him and traveling with him. Now I'm teaching this, and then apply what he was teaching to the particular group, the region, the culture, the language. He taught in Prakrit, which was kind of a layman's Sanskrit. And there's very little we find of that translated into text. That was all oral. And from those oral teachings, people in different regions who had their particular scholarly or advanced script would transfer those oral teachings into texts. Well, the people from the region of Gandhara, which is why this is a significant find in the recent century or decades, is that the Gandhari script was had variants, but the point is the people of that region that gathered there from all these different areas, from Iran and the more western regions and the more eastern regions and China and all over, the language there was specific to that region. And so when the teachings of Shakyamuni went there, they had a variety of middle portions of the oral teaching, because the teachings to those people or of the Northeast, where Varanasi, where Shakyamuni spent a lot of his time teaching, they differed in their central portions. And some of these were in Pali, some were in Sanskrit, some were in Gandhari, and some were in occasionally Prakrit. And amongst the different dialects and versions, when you take the same sutra or the same commentary and you put them side by side, it becomes glaringly obvious that where there's 41 stanzas in the Gandhari script, there are only 12 in the Pali, or there are some 26 or something in the Sanskrit. So how could they vary so much? And yet in the beginning and the end, they were very, very similar, if not identical. And knowing this and how the texts were written down or committed to paper, paper, they were birch bark and other things, but you know what I mean. It becomes really easy to see where there's a consistency through the arc of time of the early teachings. And to be fair, there are some Mahayana teachings in the Gandhari script, or Kharoshti, I should say, was the accepted script, although not all of it. There are variations in that area too. That central portion, which is fluid, it's kind of even, in a way, more instructive to see the differences, because there's a certain flavor of the teaching, the certain idea in the teachings that are always present. They're just discussed a little differently. And this is why, first of all, this is exciting and fun and amazing and very instructive. If you can get a hold of it, I should have brought the book in here so you could see the author, but just look up Gandhari on Amazon and you'll find books. Some are very expensive because they're closer to the actual scholarship and study. Others, like the one that I'm reading right now, are more general academic papers made available to the public. I like those because then you get a flavor of the understanding of a more overview and understanding of how the interpretation of these scripts was put together from somebody who's a scholar and actually working on them. I find that more fascinating and instructive. But if you want just a dry scholarship, I think that can put me to sleep sometimes. So I appreciate the persona of the educator, right? But something becomes very, very clear, even though these aren't there are in the scripts some Lotus Sutra in Gandhari and Kharoshti. He doesn't go over them in this book, and I'm going to do some research and see if I can find a translation of either all of or part of the Lotus Sutra in these early scripts. That'll be another book, I'm sure, because even though he talks about them, he doesn't have actual translations in print in his book. But he also talks about how there wasn't really a canon of Buddhism for a long time, unless you move into sectarian territories, certain sects, like Theravada, who, for whatever reason they had, would collect these certain anthologies. Really, they're just groups of teachings with certain specificity to the group they were taught to. As we know, Buddhism was taught to the capacity of the people, right? And the capacity changes from culture to culture, language to language. So you have this formula of here's the teaching, here's how I'm describing it to you particularly, and just to wrap it up so you get the gist of the teachings with some, core things. Here's the for a group, a sect, to collect Pali translations and to make their own Pali translations, and then to claim this is it. This is the authoritative text. There is no other text. Everything else is fake news, fake sutra, fake. Only this. Only ours is correct. Especially as I say it, I'm laughing because it's just so arrogant. But as you read and you discuss and understand this scholarship, you immediately understand that there is no authoritative, no, this is it. Nobody knows the exact words of Buddha because it was an orally transmitted teaching. Certainly, with all of this memorization and repetition and all these different languages and cultures and areas, we certainly know the consistencies and the meaning of Shakyamuni's teaching, which Shakyamuni himself said, look, don't get stuck on the words, right? Understand the meaning of what I'm saying to you, of what your practice should be. And that gets reinforced the more and more you dig into this research and this knowledge about Buddhist scholarship. It becomes so obvious. And as I was saying earlier, as you see these different transcriptions or ideas or transcriptions of what was taught to these different cultures and languages, you can see, even though they're different in the middle, which is sometimes a very large portion, it bubbles through them, even though some of them have quite a different way of saying the same thing. You can easily, or we can, with our capacity, see much more easily through the words, the message. And that's the all-important thing, right? So, although it gives me a chuckle to think of how many Theravadins have taken me to task and saying, well, that's not even the words of Buddha, like they know. I mean, just talk about attachment, right? And this thing, attachment, is largely spoken of, especially in the earlier teachings, through the skandhas, the aggregates, the defilements, the what's the other word that I love that give to the skandhas? Afflictions. Like it's a disease, or at very least a very bad pandemic, not to be too current. So the skandhas are a topic of discussion amongst a lot of the Hinayana teachings. And this is why I'm spending a little more time on them. What became really obvious to me as we're doing with these, this is part 2 now, of this Nidana, Skandha consciousnesses thing, is that I think you can identify the skandhas with, we just went over the Nidana, right? You remember in the Nidana, in the 12 links of the causal chain, very soon at the beginning, I can go back and check my notes, but it's in the first, when energy and work get together, and then comes identification in there. And as soon as that starts to happen, there's this idea of sense consciousnesses. How do I see, touch, feel? It's very early in the Nidana, or earlier than you might expect. These formations happen so well. The whole Nidana happens in an instant, but the order of the way that curve of energy to mass to matter to consciousnesses happens very early, not very, very close to the initial process. And as I read the skandhas, I want you to keep that in mind, because the construction of a self through identification and sense consciousness becoming sense organs. This is the skandhas. So if you were looking at a drawing, I'll try to find, I created an image for my book, Beyond Zen, and the chapter on the conditioned genesis that goes into the Nidana. There's a chart that I made, and I'll post that as soon as I find it. I'll put it on this video so you can see it. So I made a chart of the 12 Nidana, and I used a bracket to identify certain sections of it and their relationship to the others. And off to the side, I have kind of our human samsaric manifestation. I think I used a yin-yang symbol because there's that separation, that identification, and seizing upon, craving, that kind of represents samsaric existence. And I show how this cyclical thing works from instantiation, birth, old age, death, and then the cycle of that energy continues through not an individual, but the process of life as a whole. And so I think it's fascinating. Remind yourself as I read this discussion of the 5 aggregates, and believe me, it gets very voluminous. So I just want to read the first basic description of these, because I think if you understand that they're part of the process of life, that they're really endemic long before birth happens, they're already built in. It does a couple of things. Number one, it elucidates how enormously attached we are. We are of this attachment. The reason we're here is attachment. As I've said before, just look at the way an atom, a molecule, a cell comes together. It comes together through these tremendous forces of collection, attachment, destruction. It's all going on long before an actual material life happens, right? So I'm doing this because I want you to understand the way Buddhism and Buddha taught these concepts over time, and you can begin to see that if you learn for years the Nidana and grapple with that in your mind, the nature of your impermanence, which is why he did all of this. Okay, you're an impermanent thing. What do you mean? Look at my great-grandfather still living. We're here an awfully long time. What do you mean we're just not real? Well, it's not that we're not real. It's just that the nature of how we are here is all ephemeral. It's all through these little processes that we perceive as a whole, but they're really just very temporary instantiations. Whoa, what are you talking about, dude? Right? So this is the order in which he taught these things, starting with the Four Noble Truths, and then the Eightfold Noble Path. Well, how do I do all those 8 things? Well, if you understand to the nth degree how something is built, then you can start looking with more granularity on the effects of how something is built. The more you learn and experience in your mind the construct that it becomes your idea of self, the easier it becomes for you to let go of that idea. Not the teaching idea, but the reality, the understanding how you come about. It becomes easier for you to relinquish your attachment, your craving, your permanence of that. It becomes more and more the elusive thing that it really is. And so as we go into the skandhas, we're digging deeper into the Nidana, which is digging deeper into the Eightfold Path, digging deeper into the Four Truths. You see, they all mount on one another. They're not just, Oh, now the five skandhas. What are we learning now? Well, it's the same thing. You're just digging deeper with a higher consciousness, a higher mental capability of understanding it, because you have previous ground to rely upon, and you're building your knowledge, building your enlightenment, if you will. That's why there's this progression in Buddhism of more and more granular observation of your experience. Ultimately, the experience of the entire life process. All phenomena follow this path. Some very minute portion ends up in a human conscious mind. Others simply lesser developed instantiations, but no less important, like planet, sun, tree, so on and so forth, dog, cat, right? So, as usual, I've used up a lot of time explaining what I'm going to talk about. Boy, this Buddha's conundrum of teaching really hits me, really hits home. So I don't know how far we'll get, but let's start. Okay, so somehow I managed, I don't know if I did it with my book or I hit something on the computer that stopped that video, so I'll take it back up from where I've already gone. So hopefully I won't lose you in any of this. Oops. Yeah, I don't want to do that. Let me go back to... Sorry about this. My human distractions got in the way. All right. So, as you'll recall, in the Nidana, and I hope I haven't already said this, we have this descent, and I have a drawing that will explain. I think I've already gone over that. So let's just get into it. The five aggregates are the aggregates of materialities, the aggregate of feelings, the aggregate of cognitions, the aggregate of motivational dispositions, and the aggregate of consciousnesses. Now, what the heck does that mean? What is materiality? Materiality is whatever has dimensionality. Yeah, it's interesting, because materiality is like a point, right? It's a location. What does that actually mean? And so he describes it as dimensionality. So the moment, see, we've gone from energy to work to now we're describing space, the first instantiation of some mass, something that takes up space, the initiation of time, because without space there's no time, and without time, separation, something, phenomena, there can be no space, because mass takes up space. This is a very important idea about time in Buddhism that develops later, but it's implied here. And consists of all the four great elements and everything that is derived from the four great elements. So what are elements? Elements now are things that we're describing about a process, not actual things. But what a thing is consistent of, from energy to mass to material, right? So it's appropriate that's under materiality. And what are the four great elements? Earth element, water element, fire element, and wind element. Now pay attention. It's not actual earth. It's not actual wind. These are labels put on these elements that are coming together, manifesting into form. We're not at form yet. Remember in the Nidana, we're not at the forms yet. We're just at the consistency of ideas. The formations is where we are. Remember that word comes up a lot. Among these, what is the earth element? It's solidity. So mass now is matter. It's not just a calculation of space. It's a consistent part, a phenomena in and of itself, right? Think of an atom. Think of the components of an atom. There's a proton and a neutron and an electron. What is a proton? The proton is made of an element of positive energy, negative energy. All the properties of a proton are the elements of the proton, you see? What is the water element? It is liquidity. Okay? Think of water. Water has the property of liquidity, obviously, but it also has mass, and it's made of atoms and molecules, right? What is the fire element? It is heat. What happens to water when you heat it? It becomes gaseous. What happens to water when you take away heat from it? It becomes ice, hard, solidity. What is the third, or the wind element? It is the sense, where am I now? Yeah, that is gaseousness. What is derived from all of these elements? The sense organ of the eye. Oh, okay. Remember that leap we made in the 12 Nidana, where we went from formations to the formed? In the middle of that is the aggregates. In other words, why do we need form? What is the impetus for form? So the aggregates are our mechanism of, if we're going to make stuff, how do we know we made stuff? Well, we have to see it. Or it has to have properties. And it has properties of solidity or fluid or gaseousness. How do we perceive those properties? How do we receive those elements in our, oh yeah, we have to put this together. We have to experience it. So how do you experience stuff? Well, one way is by its color, or whether it's liquid, or whether it's solid, or whether it's gaseous. How can we tell? We can tell by how it feels. How do we touch it? What does it taste like? What does it sound like? What does it look like? What do you mean look like? Well, we'll have to have something that can process light bouncing off of it, colors, dark, light, cold, warm. We need a tool that can receive light, and then we'll need some master where all of these perceptions can go in and put them together in a way that we can categorize and with specificity and distinguish them one from another. So this is the whole process of creating what would at some point become some level of consciousness. Even an octopus has much consciousness about what its surroundings are. It changes color at will to match its surroundings. So don't tell me it can't see. This is fascinating. This huge breakdown is happening between two elements of the Nidana. This is really, really granular. Or more to the point, this happens very, very quickly in the process of life. The sense organ of the eye, the sense organ of the ear, the sense organ of the nose, the sense organ of the tongue, the sense organ of the body, which is where the brain would be located, visibles, sounds, smells, tastes, everything that can be subsumed under the tactical sensations and unmanifest action. And among these, what is the sense organ of the eye? Well, it is the sentient materiality, which has color as its sense object. What is the sense organ of the ear? It is the sentient, in other words, mindful, materiality, which has sounds as its sense object. What is the sense organ of the nose? It is the sentient materiality which has smells as its sense object. And what is the sense organ of the tongue? It is the sentient materiality which has taste as its sense object. What is the sense organ of the body? It is the sentient materiality which has tactile sensations as its sense object. And what are visibles? They are the sense objects of the eye: color, configuration, manifest action. And what are sounds? They are the sense objects of the ear, having as their causes great elements appropriated by the body, or great elements unappropriated. And what are smells? They are the sense objects of the nose: pleasant smells, unpleasant smells, and those which are neither. And what are tastes? They are the sense objects of the tongue: sweet, sour, salty, sharp, bitter, and astringent. What is everything that can be subsumed under the tactical sensations? They are the sense objects of the body, the great elements themselves: softness, hardness, heaviness, lightness, color, coldness, hunger, and thirst. What is unmanifest action? It is the materiality which has arisen from the manifest action or meditational concentration. It is invisible and exercises no resonance. In other words, this is a condition of the mind. And I'm not going to read each one of these, but the most interesting one is the fourth one, I think. And what are the motivational dispositions? It's a pretty sophisticated categorization tool there. Well, they are events associated with citas. Other than feelings, let's see what he defines citas as. Just curious. Where are the footnotes? I'm not seeing them right now, but page turning karma is back. Okay, I don't have them here. They must be way in the back. Yeah. Yep. Anyway, citas are the formations in the mind, okay? Other than feelings and cognitions, and those that are dissociated from citas. Among these are what are the events associated with the citas. They are whatever events are associated with the citas. And what are they? They are contact, mental attention, feelings, cognition, volitions, zest, confidence, memory or mindfulness, meditational concentration, insight, resolve, inner memory or mindful, shame, dread of blame, the root of the beneficial of lack of greed, the root of the beneficial of lack of hostility, the root of the beneficial of lack of confusion, vigor, tranquility, carefulness, equanimity, attitude of non-harming, attachment, aversion, pride, ignorance, views, doubt, anger, harming, attachment, malice, hypocrisy, maliciousness, envy, selfishness, deceitfulness, guile, mischievous exuberance, desire to harm, lack of shame, lack of dread, of blame, mental fogginess, excitedness, lack of resolve, sloth, carelessness, loss of mindfulness, distractedness, lack of recognition, regret, torpor, initial mental application, and subsequent discursive thought. Among these, the first 5 occur in every cita. The next 5 are certain only with specific objects of sense. The next 11 are beneficial. The next 6 are affliction. The rest are secondary afflictions. The last 4 also become different, i.e. they're capable of being either afflictions or beneficial. All right. So what's the point of all this? We can see that in the teachings of Buddha, to understand profoundly the way we work, the way our mind works, the way our experience, remember the word experience. How does our experience, your experience, how does it form? Right? You can teach at one level that our minds control how we experience the world. Okay, I'm off and running. That's all I needed to know. But I can't seem to get a handle on what gosh darn thing is motivating me to do this. I want to change that habit. I see how it's affecting me, but what do I do about it? I mean, this is part of me. This is who I am. Wait. You don't understand. Yes, your mind controls your experience of everything. That's why everyone sees a different fountain in the fountain analogy. You can look that up. So how is it that I experience something different than Bob does, than Mary does? Right? Why is it that Makara always sees these things this way? I don't see things that way. Okay, well, let's take it apart further. How do you think the way you think? Let's dig into that. What's going on? Remember the Nidana? Yeah, but that just tells me how stuff is made. That doesn't tell me how it's made or how to get it, how it works. Okay, so let's talk about just this initial part of the Nidana. What does it mean to go from this energy of combinations and collections and amalgams, the work we're doing, to suddenly having form, name and form, nama rupa? What's going on there? Why do we jump from energies at work to stuff? Let's talk about what's in that moment, that fraction of a moment. Well, there are aggregates of these forces coming together at work that have a desire, a volition, a movement toward an amalgam that goes from energy to mass, to matter, to creation, to instantiation. This formation becomes first a formation of the mind, and then a formation of stuff of the mind. If you're going to experience a mind, you need to give the mind something to do. And there's the physical component of all phenomena. Namarupa, name and form. For a human, this is how it works. That is the 5 aggregates. That will get you started. At that granularity, you'll start to view everything you do in life as simply an experience of all of these energies, these forces, these imperatives. The very fact that you desire your next breath and something to do, or sex, or food, or protection, on and on, is built on all of these intricate actions coming together, forming this thing. And as you saw in the description of the, some of the descriptions anyway, of the aggregates, they include the non-thing. They include the activity that is mental. And this is how we develop these consciousnesses. And those consciousnesses require something to be conscious of. Eye, ear, tongue, body, assembler, brain. All of these work together so that you can observe the stuff we're making. These forces, these intricate and extant forces that constitute all phenomena, life. Oh, that's a lot to think about. Yeah. But if you keep repeating this lesson over and over again, memorize it, and start to integrate it into your experience, you'll begin to realize how much of that experience you're just reacting to, and how much of that experience, by knowing it, you can start to exercise some control over. And so the breath of Hinayana, Theravada, is mostly about, to a great deal about, the third noble truth: cessation of the formations of these consciousnesses, thoughts, suffering. The formations of them all come from the same process. And so as you turn inwards and you start to observe your experience of the world more and more in the minutiae, you can start to, I'm going to stop that one. And you can start meditating and concentrating and chanting to your mandala, to use your Buddha mind to see it for what it is. Simply a part of the instantiation of everything, all phenomena, life itself. Oh, I don't have to be so personally affected by that. It's actually, it's a helpful thing, because I can use it in a positive way. Rather than being influenced and reacting to it, I can see it for what it is and go, oh, yeah, good reminder. And use it in a calm and educated and knowing sense as a bodhisattva, and appreciate it. See it in others. See it all around me, because it is all around me. It's not mine. I don't possess it. I don't get crushed by it. So in that way, studying earlier sutras and teachings is helpful, because some of us, we need to read that and understand that, chant about it, concentrate on it, and then we get our own little, aha, that's what's going on. And that very insight is different for all of us. And that insight doesn't mean, oh, well, this is what I need to do now. Throw away the Butsudan, throw away Nichiren. I don't need that, because this is where I got my insight. No. The insight you got by reading it was by virtue of your practicing Lotus Sutra Buddhism. Always, always remember that, because that's our capacity in this time. When these were taught, people didn't have that capacity. So they would practice their whole lives on understanding these things. And you could. But if you use your Lotus Sutra, you use Myoho Renge-kyo, this mandala, to awaken your Buddha mind, you can now have insights of a far higher order that will lead you directly to your realization of Buddhahood in each of these minutiae. And you can live it out as a bodhisattva with this Buddha enlightenment, awakening. That's what we're doing. And so next, now we have 5 or 6 actually, skandhas, the sixth being this mental cognitive experience. But now we're going to dissect this a little further with the 9 consciousnesses, and that will be in the next video. And I'll use an illustration that I have that combines the Nidana, the aggregates, and the 9 consciousnesses all in one diagram. And it's a little hard to read it, but if you read it in context, that picture I made, map, drawing, whatever you want to call it, if you look at it in context of what we're talking about, it'll start to make some sense. And I'll put that up here, but I will talk about it more in depth in the next video. Okay? Thank you so much for tolerating my my humanity and sticking it out, for your hard work in trying to understand all of this. Take your time. Be kind to yourself. and others who you may be trying to explain this to. Okay, if all you do with this information, now that it's seeped in there, is take it as motivation to chant Daimoku Namu Myoho Renge Kyo to your mandala, trust me, your Buddha mind will recognize it. And it will help you to understand in whatever particular way you need to understand it for you. Because the more you understand it, the more enlightened you become, and the more of a guide you are to everything in your environment, including friends, family, and so on. So, with all of that, thanks once again for my patrons, and both in Patreon and outside of Patreon. You guys are amazing, and I'm so thankful for your support, which allows me to find books and resources that I can print out for myself and use for my own development as well as yours. You're helping everyone. So in that regard, deep appreciation. Love all of you. Appreciate your efforts. Be kind to yourself, as I always say, kind to others, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.